Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the unglamorous arithmetic, the gritty rise, and honestly, the shocking corporate stumble of Under Armour. We are going to look at the real story of how a massive global brand was built literally from absolute scratch. And, what actually happens when the narrative gets a little too far ahead of the numbers. Let's dive right into this incredible question. How exactly does a college kid delivering Valentine's roses build a billion-dollar NFL empire, and then almost lose the whole shebang? You see, when we look at massive global sports brands today, they just feel inevitable, right? Like they've always just been there. But every empire starts somewhere, and usually it's nowhere glamorous.
Which brings us to Section 1, the basement hustle.
Our story starts back in late 1996, right in his grandmother's Washington, D.C. basement. Kevin Plank was a 24-year-old former Maryland college football player who took a massive, highly reckless bet. He poured exactly $17,000 of his own hard-earned savings into boxes of synthetic shirts that, quite frankly, literally nobody was asking for. He had no retail experience, zero industry connections, and absolutely no guaranteed buyers. All he really had was this deep conviction that he had noticed something the entire sporting goods industry had just completely missed. And this next number brilliantly illustrates the massive, sweat-inducing risk he took. He also racked up $40,000 in credit card debt. He spread it carefully across 5 different cards, scraped together some loans from family and friends, all just to get this thing off the ground. Most financial advisors would look at this and just call it a total disaster waiting to happen. The interest was just ticking quietly in the background while he tried to build a market that didn't even exist yet. The entire idea was actually born from this nagging splinter in Planck's mind. Back on the practice fields at the University of Maryland, he was bothered by something incredibly ordinary. Every single practice, his cotton t-shirt would soak through with sweat, getting super heavy and clinging to his body. But he realized his synthetic compression shorts stayed perfectly dry. They actually wicked the moisture away. So he asked a childishly simple question. If his compression shorts stayed dry during practice, why on earth did athletes just accept heavy, soaking wet cotton shirts? So he designed a snug, synthetic base layer shirt to solve that exact problem. Now, it's absolutely crucial to note where that initial $17,000 actually came from. It was largely from his college side hustle. While he was still a student, he ran this little business called Cupid's Valentine, literally selling Valentine's Day roses to college sweethearts. It just proves his entrepreneurial drive was pumping long before he ever made sports gear. I mean, nobody watching a college kid deliver flowers in February could have possibly guessed they were looking at the seed capital for a future NFL supplier. Moving right along to Section 2, bypassing the gatekeepers. You see, having a cool product is really only half the battle. Planck had to build a market from thin air, which meant completely bypassing traditional sporting goods retailers. Remember, back in 1996, cotton was absolutely king. There was zero shelf space waiting for synthetic base layers. So the crucial point here is how this grassroots flywheel actually started turning. Planck didn't go and pitch fancy executives. No, he loaded these shirts into the trunk of his car, drove up and down the East Coast, and pitched directly to the unglamorous practical equipment managers, the guys who actually decide what goes into a locker room. He started by mailing free samples to his former Maryland teammates who were now in the pros. Then, a tiny crack in the door. The equipment manager at Georgia Tech placed an early order, and word of mouth in the equipment room is incredibly powerful. Soon, the equipment manager for the Atlanta Falcons saw the gear at Georgia Tech and wanted it for his NFL players. He was letting the product earn undeniable trust, step by step. By the end of 1996, he had sold about 500 shirts. That was just enough to break even at roughly $17,000 in revenue. Think about that for a second. That means he worked a whole entire year just to make back his original savings, all while that $40,000 in credit card debt just kept compounding. Sure, they were tiny numbers, but they were absolute proof that athletes who actually tried the product came back for more. Direct sales to end users built credibility way faster than any ad campaign ever could. Let's transition over to Section 3, the billion-dollar breakout. Planck masterfully layered his earned advantages here. In 1999, Under Armour landed a massive product placement in Oliver Stone's football movie, Any Given Sunday. Boom, suddenly a brand that was basically a locker room secret was on movie screens everywhere. This huge wave of national awareness opened bigger doors. By 2001, they actually became the NHL's official supplier, jumping from college gears straight to major pro leagues. And because Planck funded those riskiest early stages all by himself, he kept total control of the company.
In 2005, Under Armour went public, raising an impressive $157 million. And by 2010, the company crossed $1 billion in annual sales. Talk about a glow up, right? From a sweaty practice field annoyance to a literal billion-dollar juggernaut.
But as we see in Section 4, the growth trap, things start to change. This explainer doesn't just end with a victory lap, because as it turns out, the skills needed to start a company aren't always the exact same ones needed to sustain it. For years, between 2010 and 2016, it looked like a law of nature. Under Armour posted 26 straight quarters of explosive 20% plus revenue growth. 26! That kind of streak makes a company feel completely invincible. But infinite, uninterrupted growth? Yeah, that's rarely a reality.
Then reality hit, and it hit hard. In 2017, a surprise CFO resignation and weak earnings caused the stock to just absolutely plummet. Then the SEC and the Department of Justice opened investigations into whether the company was pulling sales forward to make their inevitable slowdown look a little smoother. And then came the cultural hits. In 2018, a Wall Street Journal report revealed employees were expensing strip club visits on corporate cards, alongside stories of Plank flying a journalist around on his private jet. These toxic culture revelations and plunging stocks forced the founder, the guy who started this whole thing in his grandma's basement, to publicly hand over the wheel and step down as CEO in 2019.
To really put the financial toll of this era into perspective, just take a look at these staggering settlements they paid out just to resolve the fallout from their accounting practices. The company eventually had to cough up $9 million to settle the SEC charges in 2021, and then a massive $434 million to settle a shareholder class action lawsuit. Just incredible sums of money. Which brings us to this question. What happens when the story a company tells gets ahead of the numbers underneath it? This right here is the absolute crux of their stumble. It's a really sobering reminder that fast growth absolutely does not exempt you from scrutiny. Honesty in the raw, unvarnished numbers matters just as much as the growth itself. Because when the narrative outpaces reality, the correction is always painful. And as we just saw, incredibly expensive. So let's wrap this up with Section 5, Lessons Under the Fabric. Looking under the fabric of this whole story, these principles really cut both ways. First off, let your own annoyances spark ideas. Plank invented from a soaked shirt on a dirty field, not from some sterile market report. Second, hustle to fund it yourself. Remember those Valentine's roses? A scrappy side gig can actually fund a massive dream. Third, build trust directly. Winning over one grumpy equipment room manager did way more than a billboard ever could. Fourth, fast growth is awesome, but running a company with integrity means honesty in the numbers is strictly non-negotiable. And finally, true leadership means knowing exactly when to step back and publicly own your mistakes, even when the company is your life's work. None of this happens if a college kid just shrugged off a sweaty t-shirt as being part of the game. Every massive empire starts with a nerve-wracking bet made out of a basement or a car trunk. The lesson here isn't really about shirts. It's about noticing the small problems everyone else has just learned to live with. So I'll leave you with this. What problem are you just learning to live with instead of finally solving? What is the small, shaky first step that you are avoiding today? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.